Hello everyone, great to see you all here. And it's Nick and Christine, are they coming?
I'm going to guess you went to lunch.
Okay. And Neil. Okay, well, they'll come if they come. So last year we did 5 data days, and in each data day we took the time afterwards to debrief and come up with warm and cool things that happened during the data day. Katie really helped us with that process, and I think it was really helpful because when you're like during data day, you have all this, you're like, oh, this went really well, this didn't go so well, but then a month and a half from now, you forget everything. And so it's really nice to like come together right away and think about, okay, what went really well and what needs to be improved. The other thing we did last year is we began to incorporate our teacher leaders more into that process because they have a really unique perspective and have a big impact on the work that we do. And so this year we have sort of a more formal data team that's helping us run these data days. So as you saw this morning, they did an amazing opening and closing, and then also they're part of the debrief today. So you guys can so we thought we would break up this time. We know that you have a lot of questions, but we also want to make sure that we do some reflecting about how it went today. So we're going to take about 20 minutes to do the warm and cool, and then about 20 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. So let's start with warm. What do we think went well today?
Do you want to start with your own reflections?
Yeah.
Okay.
Put you on the spot.
A couple of things that were on the top of my mind just coming into it is I think our item analysis process is kind of at odds with how we should be analyzing items in the Common Core. And there's some change we need to do there. We weren't able to do it prior to this data day. So I was coming in, I was trying to really tell the message that you need to be back in the text, you need to be back in the text, you need to be back in the text, because that really tells you what was complicated about the item. And I thought people did a really good job doing that and getting very granular about what was it about this text that made this skill difficult for this time. So that was great. I also just thought, if I think back to some of our other data days, that people were present mentally and physically a lot more than I think they were at times last year. And people were in the room having a difficult discussion and not quitting when it got too hard or doing something else when it got too hard. And they were doing the thing that was helpful to do at the time when we were supposed to do it, so that was great. I also think that everyone got smarter about the Common Core during this time, which to me is another softer goal. Like even myself, just hearing people, Katie and her team talk through a skill really helps me understand how the skill is playing out. So I just think there was a really high level of intellectual engagement with the work, which there has to be just because it's so much more complex. So those things I thought went really well.
Great. Yeah. Katie or Dave?
I felt very similarly to what Jamie said about from here for the English and history departments. I felt like everyone was very present. I think the sequence of the data analysis into the action planning was perfect, and the amount of time that we spent on each section, I felt like the guiding questions made sure that our conversations were really focused on the right part of the data analysis and the action planning instead of getting ahead of ourselves. I think Jamie did a good job of making sure that we really stayed on topic and stayed at a certain part of the cycle. And then I also think that we left feeling really confident in our action plans and the next steps that we're going forward with. In terms of the opening, I think something positive from that was just giving the whole staff a real high-level look at our overall data in the first.
And I would just add in something that I think we did more specifically for the math and science team was that what was it, the gallery walk. Both Kay and I picked up a couple of good ideas from in this case it was some math teachers that shared ideas about how to solve our problem. So that was really helpful just to do some cross-curricular brainstorming. And I don't recall doing that really at any point last year. So I found that was much more helpful this year.
I thought that the roles were really clear this year, or this time. Like I felt like last year it was unclear, like who's doing the opening, who's doing the closing, who's doing the facilitating, all of that. It was just like crystal clear what kind of came out of gate strong in that area, and I just loved, I thought the opening was really great. Like I thought that the metaphor was fantastic and funny, but also really true to like what we're experiencing. And then also that that the data was really also told that story. It was like, okay, we got the turnaround bit done, and now we're moving on, focusing on the we can move now to areas of growth for next time. Maybe we start with cohort leaders.
I think our opening and closing were, they got to our purpose and our objective, and they were light and I think inspiring, but I think we could have typed it up and just made sure it was really clear who was taking on which roles, when each part of the presentation was really happening. And I think also in our planning process, taking a little more time. I know the data comes very close to this day, but at least a little bit more time to really become familiar and comfortable presenting the data to the staff.
I would add on to that and say I think we had a pretty good idea for a lot of the higher level data about academy versus the network versus other high performing charter schools, but we didn't get kind of nitty gritty with the data beforehand, and I feel like we could provide better examples for specific wings. I mean, 6th grade ELA did really well in this, or 8th grade math did really well with this. So I think school-wide we did solid job with presenting the data, but could have targeted some more specific big wins for the staff to see.
I think it's really tricky to toe the line when dealing with adults. You want to give them a lot of important data, but you don't want to bore them. It just goes slide after slide. So I think the length of slides was really good. I don't know if we go back, maybe we'll change the selection and then do much more pinpoint. Like same with the kind of the whole entire model, the idea is to have a true theme, like almost like a subliminal thought, as they're starting to get tired and as the year's progressing. So we played around with a bunch of different ideas and we ended up going with Rocky, but it's interesting, not every, like we have a younger staff and a lot of people don't even know who Rocky is. Which you kind of found out in the intro, like, who's that guy?
Be homework for everyone.
So we'll definitely have to do some tweaking to make it some more aligned with the audience.
Katie mentioned that the roles were a little bit unclear, so maybe next time we just do a run through beforehand, like maybe we meet before, like in the morning, like all of us. I think Jamie and I did a little bit of that this morning, but it was a little bit rushed, so maybe next time, like maybe the day before we run through it, or just trying to think how we actually.
I felt like once we're in the rooms, the roles were very clear. That was very clear. It went well. I just think in our data team version, for the sake of us, maybe to the staff, it seemed like it was okay, like we knew it. But I
think even just like coming together at 7:30,
yeah,
the morning of, and talking about what's going to happen, I think would be helpful.
which we did. Yeah, but I think all of us.
Yeah.
Making sure.
Very good. Okay, great. What about in the room?
The big thing on my mind is that our old item analysis process is fighting against the Common Core. Specifically that we start with the data point and use that to like determine our world. Mm-hmm. And I think what the Common Core requires is you start with the text and get out to the data point from the text. So I'm really thinking seriously about how to change the process so that next time those two things, the text and the data point, aren't fighting so much. And that we more authentically start with what was the challenging text, what was challenging in the text, which standards became challenging because of the way the text was, and then to teach out kind of that way. That's what's on my mind. I also wonder about, I was just really excited to have history in the room. Like, this is the first year we had interim assessments, and that was really powerful. You guys did great work. I would bet dollars to donuts, if that's how the phrase goes, that you and you were talking about the exact same thing. I would bet. So I would like to get those two teams talking.
Science and history.
Yeah, because I guarantee like where kids struggled on science was probably the same place they struggled on history. And I think since your instruction is probably the most similar, it would be interesting to see if you guys could help each other too.
I'm going to push back on that because it was so great having the science team in with the math team. involved, and there was like all these really cool connections that they made just around the content, like, you know, this idea of rate and like density and speed and like, you know, constant rate of change and that was really cool that came along. So like the content, I bet that like instructionally they're similar, but the content in math and science was just, I would be sad to lose that. So maybe there's a way that we can sort of do more, like put our rooms right next to each other and somehow have math and science share when they're talking about content and have science and history share when they're talking about instructional strategies or something like that.
I would say one of the connections just from talking to Dave is purely on science content, like how do you get kids from the knowledge to the evaluation level, which is the same journey we have in history, and I think it's all the same tricks. And like ancient Sumer is in volcanoes, but how do you get kids to evaluate information on ancient Sumer is the same.
We had this tension in math, which sounds kind of similar. Like the Common Core really asked kids to apply their knowledge in new ways, and we sort of felt like a lot of people were sort of going down the road of thinking about, okay, we just need to give students more sort of exposure to new types of problems because they're going to see it in all different ways, and so we have to show them all of those ways, as opposed to really getting deep into the conceptual understandings behind those problems, so that they can sort of access any problem that comes their way. And so I think there's also something that's similar to what you're saying, just about pushing teachers to think about that concept. In this case, in your case, the text, but like the sort of deep understanding behind it, as opposed to like going straight to the text.
There's probably an analogy between the text and the concept.
Well, I spend a lot of my time in the math group, and I think what I saw the math teachers kind of coming up against is, you know, there's always going to be issues with access to the problems, either vocabulary access or, you know, I don't know exactly what this application of the problem means. And I think that sometimes there can be like a trap for teachers of wanting to talk more about how to allow the kids to access the problem through that kind of application lens. And I think what is sort of the harder work for teachers to do is to really focus instead of that, like on the real, like the sub-skill analysis of the content, and really being honest with themselves about, you know, part of the reason they might not have done well on this problem is because they don't really understand the nuances of like sea level or elevation, but another reason they probably didn't access it is because we didn't integrate the concept of absolute zero when we're talking about integer operations. And so kind of, I think like an area for growth is being like a little more explicit about that with the teachers, like so that they focus their conversations on more on the